Elias Mercer never thought silence could be so loud. The neutral station that circled the blue-green planet of Thalros was built for diplomacy, but most of the time it felt like a lonely shell of metal and glass. Wide corridors echoed with the sound of boots and alien claws, but rarely with laughter. Every room smelled faintly of recycled air and polished steel. For weeks, Elias had been assigned as the sole human envoy here, surrounded by representatives from species that spoke in tones too formal, too careful, too cold. Humanity was still new in galactic politics. Most other races watched them with interest, but also with doubt. To many, humans were a mystery, too bold, too emotional, too unpredictable. And yet, despite the distance, Elias had a task: to keep talking. Talking was humanity's way into this web of stars. That was how he first met her. Her name was Serenia, a liaison from the Veyari collective. The Veyari were tall, graceful beings with pale skin that shimmered faintly under light, like water rippling under the sun. They were known for their calm minds and sharp diplomacy. Many said they felt no emotion, or if they did, they hid it too well. Elias expected cold formality from her as well, but when she appeared on the holoscreen for their first session, her eyes lingered on him with something unusual, something that looked very much like curiosity. "Human representative," she said, voice smooth and quiet. "Shall we begin?" "Yes," Elias replied, straightening his posture. "Our agenda is cultural exchange. I was told to explain human traditions." "Traditions," Serenia repeated softly. "Yes, tell me of them," so he did. He spoke of Earth, of festivals where lights filled the skies, of songs that carried through the centuries, of meals shared across long tables with family. At first, he expected her to take notes like a student. Instead, she asked questions. What does it mean to share food? Why does song matter to your people? Why do you laugh at small things? And when Elias explained, she tilted her head slightly like someone who wanted to know not just the facts, but the feelings. It surprised him. It made the hours slip by quickly. In the days that followed, their meetings continued. At first it was duty, nothing more. But soon Elias found himself waiting for them. He would walk into the small communication chamber, activate the hololink, and there she would be, calm, graceful, and yet asking questions that went deeper than the surface. Sometimes, she asked about Earth's art, sometimes about its history, sometimes about humanity itself. What makes humans fight wars even when they know the cost? Why do humans write stories of hope in times of despair? Why do you smile, Elias, when you speak of things that are painful? Elias often paused before answering, surprised at her directness. He gave her honest replies, simple ones, because he did not want to sound like a diplomat giving speeches. He wanted her to understand what it meant to be human, and in turn, Serenia revealed small pieces of herself. She admitted that she sometimes watched human music archives and found the sounds strange but soothing. She confessed she struggled with understanding humor but still wanted to hear human jokes. Once she even tried to tell one herself. It was so poor that Elias laughed until his eyes watered, and Serenia blinked at him with visible confusion before finally saying, "Then I have succeeded, perhaps." For a Veyari it was a rare thing. She was trying. But even as their conversations grew warmer, the station around them remained cold. Other envoys eyed Elias with suspicion. He could feel their gazes whenever he passed in the corridors. Rumors spread quickly here, faster than messages across the stars. Some said the Veyari were testing humanity. Some whispered that the Veyari sought to control them. Elias reminded himself not to trust too easily. Diplomacy was delicate, but each time Serenia appeared on the holoscreen, something inside him relaxed. One particular session stretched long into the artificial night. The station's clock said it was past midnight, but neither of them seemed ready to end the talk. They had started with trade regulations but somehow drifted into speaking of childhood. Elias found himself telling her about running across fields on Earth, about the smell of rain and the taste of fruit picked fresh from the trees. Serenia listened with an expression that for a Veyari looked almost like wonder. "In the collective," she said softly, "we are raised with structure. Every hour is planned. Every path is clear, but you speak of freedom as though it is air you breathe." "It is," Elias said, without thinking. "It's not always easy, but it's what makes us who we are." For a moment, silence stretched between them. It wasn't empty, though. It was the kind of silence that felt alive, as if both were thinking about what had been said. Then Serenya's eyes narrowed slightly, and her voice carried a tone Elias had never heard from her before. Gentle, almost hesitant. "Tell me, Elias," she asked, "are you single human?" The words struck him like a sudden gust of wind. He froze. His thoughts scattered. Of all the questions he had expected, the ones about human governments, cultures, sciences, this was not among them. His mind replayed the words again and again, wondering if he had misheard. But the holofeed was clear, and Serenya's gaze was steady, waiting. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He could not answer, not yet. Why would she ask that? Was it simple curiosity? A mistake in translation? Or did the Veyari hold some deeper meaning behind such questions? Elias had studied their customs, but nowhere in the reports had it mentioned anything like this. Serenya tilted her head slightly, sensing his hesitation. For once, her usual calm seemed to ripple. "I did not mean to disturb you," she said quietly. "It is only, among my people, such things are rarely spoken. Yet humans speak of them often. I wish to understand." Elias forced a breath, steadying himself. His heart was beating too quickly for what should have been a normal conversation. "It's a personal question," he said carefully. "Personal," Serenya repeated, as if tasting the word. "Yes, I see." She said nothing more after that, and the silence returned. But this time it was different. It was not comfortable. It pressed on Elias like a weight, heavy with things unsaid. Moments later, she ended the connection. Her image vanished from the screen, leaving Elias alone in the dim chamber. He sat there for a long time, staring at the empty air. One question, just one question asked so casually, had shaken him more than all the formal debates he had ever faced, and he could not stop asking himself, why did she ask it? Elias could not sleep that night. The quiet hum of the station's life support systems, usually easy to ignore, pressed against his ears like restless whispers. He lay on his narrow bunk staring at the ceiling, replaying Serenya's question in his mind again and again. "Are you single, human?" It was such a small sentence, so casual in the way she asked it, yet it carried a weight he could not understand. As a diplomat, Elias had trained himself to analyze words. In politics, every sentence mattered, every pause had meaning. But this was not politics, or at least it did not sound like politics. This was something else, something personal, and it troubled him. The following morning, Elias walked the station's corridors with a distracted mind. Around him, the hallways were filled with beings of all kinds, scaled reptilians with heavy armor, insectoid envoys that clicked in their own language, small furry traders that darted quickly between stalls. But none of them felt as important as the one face that refused to leave his thoughts. He wanted to dismiss it as nothing. Perhaps Serenya had misunderstood human culture. Perhaps she only asked as a point of study. But deep down, Elias knew better. The way she had looked at him when asking, the hesitation in her voice, those were not things of politics. Those were things of curiosity, of something close to feeling, and that was dangerous. Later that day, Elias joined the other envoys in the grand hall for a briefing. The chamber was vast, its ceiling high enough to fit a small shuttle. Light filtered down in shifting shades of blue and silver, mimicking the glow of Thalros below. The subject was routine: trade agreements, mining rights, border patrols. But as the speakers droned on, Elias noticed whispers among the delegates. Some spoke quietly of the Veyari. Others glanced at him when they thought he was not looking. The words reached his ears in fragments. Humans. Unpredictable. The Veyari taking interest. A dangerous mix-up. Elias frowned. The station was always filled with rumors, but these struck too close to what had happened. Could it be that Serenya's question was not only personal? Could it be that she was testing him for her people? When the session ended, he remained behind, waiting until most had left. Then he approached one of the few who stayed, an old Threxian envoy named Koro, whose scaled skin glistened in shades of bronze. Koro had been in politics for decades, and unlike others, he sometimes offered Elias quiet advice. "Tell me something," Elias said lowly. "What does it mean when a Veyari asks about personal matters?" Koro turned his head slowly, his eyes narrow slits. "Personal matters? Which kind?" Elias hesitated, like relationship status. For a moment, Koro studied him. Then with a sound that was half hiss, half laugh, he said, "Ah, so she asked you." Elias stiffened. You know? I hear things, Koro said, leaning closer. Human, listen well. Among the Veyari, they are precise with words. If one of them asks about bonds, it is never by chance. It is a question of trust. It is a question of seeing you not as a diplomat, but as an individual. Elias felt his chest tighten. And what happens if I answer wrong? Koro's scales shifted faintly. A gesture of warning. Then you risk more than embarrassment. You risk turning curiosity into insult and insult into division. Choose carefully. That evening, Elias sat once more in the communication chamber. He had almost considered canceling the session, but that would only draw suspicion. And so he sat there waiting, his heart uneasy. The hollow screen flickered to life, and Serenia appeared. Her pale form stood against the soft background of her own chamber, calm as always. Yet when her gaze met his, Elias thought he saw the faintest trace of hesitation, like she too remembered the question from last night. Good evening, Elias, she said, her voice steady. Shall we continue with the cultural exchange? Yes, he said, trying to sound normal. Let's continue. But the conversation that followed did not feel normal. Every word they spoke was careful, almost too careful. Elias described human architecture, great towers that reached for the sky, bridges that connected vast cities. Serenia listened politely, asked questions, but not the kind of questions she usually asked. There was a distance in her tone, like a wall had been raised. It bothered him more than he expected. Finally, Elias set down his datapad and leaned forward. Serenia, he said quietly. About what you asked yesterday. Her eyes flicked to his, sharp and alert. Yes? I wasn't sure how to answer, Elias admitted. Among humans, it is personal. Serenia studied him for a long moment. Then she lowered her gaze slightly. It is personal for us as well, she said softly. Which is why I asked. The word struck him deeper than he thought possible. He wanted to ask her why. Why she cared. Why she crossed the line between diplomat and something else. But before he could, a sudden alarm echoed through the chamber. The station's lights dimmed, then flashed red. Warning, the system announced. Hull breach detected. Sector 12 compromised. Elias shot to his feet. What's happening? Serenia's calm expression shifted into something sharper, more urgent. An attack, she said quickly. You must move. The hololink flickered as systems rerouted power. For a brief instant, Elias saw her eyes, focused, determined, almost fierce. Then the screen cut to black. Elias stood frozen for only a second before sprinting out of the chamber. The station shook as if struck by a massive hand. Somewhere far down the corridor, metal screamed as bulkheads sealed shut. Aliens of all species rushed past, some shouting, others silent in panic. But through the chaos, one thought burned in his mind, stronger than fear, stronger than duty. She asked me because it mattered, and now he might not live long enough to answer. The station's corridors shook again, harder this time, sending sparks raining from ceiling panels. Elias pressed himself against the wall as a group of insectoid envoys scuttled past, their long legs clattering loudly on the metal floor. Sirens wailed overhead, blending with the shouts of frightened diplomats. Warning, the mechanical voice of the station repeated. Hull breach contained. Intruder activity detected in Sector 9. All non-combatants evacuate to safe zones. Intruders, Elias ran. His boots echoed through the narrow passageways as he pushed past panicked figures of all shapes and sizes. He didn't know exactly who had attacked, but whispers from the past weeks returned to him. Rival powers frustrated by human Veyari talks, jealous of any bond forming between the two species. And right in the middle of it all, Elias felt a single urgent thought. Serenia. If the attackers targeted Veyari delegates or the human envoy, she would be in danger too. When he reached the central lift, a group of armored guards blocked his way. They were from the station's neutral defense force, their faces hidden behind dark visors. Envoy Mercer, one of them said sharply, you are ordered to return to the safe chambers. I need to get to the Veyari wing, Elias said, breathless. One of their liaisons is in danger. Negative, the guard interrupted. We are containing the situation. All envoys are to remain in secure locations. Elias clenched his fists. He knew the rules. He knew his duty was to stay alive, to avoid risk, to wait until security forces ended the crisis. But something inside him rebelled. He could still see Serenia's eyes on the holoscreen, sharp with warning. She hadn't looked afraid for herself. She had looked concerned for him, and he couldn't sit still knowing she was somewhere out there, perhaps surrounded by danger. Before the guards could stop him, Elias turned and sprinted down a side corridor. Shouts followed, but he didn't care. The further he ran, the more chaotic the station became. Smoke drifted through the air from a ruptured power line. A reptilian envoy crouched near a wall, clutching an injured arm. The floor vibrated with distant impacts, explosions, maybe weapons fire. Elias forced himself onward until he reached the Veyari section. The tall arched doors were sealed with glowing locks, but scorch marks told him someone had already tried to force entry. "Serenia," Elias shouted, pounding his fist against the door. "Are you in there?" For a moment, silence. Then a soft voice answered through the comm system. "Elias?" Relief flooded him. "Yes, it's me. Are you safe?" "Not for long," Serenia replied calmly. "Intruders breached the wing earlier. They may return." "Open the door," Elias urged. There was hesitation. "It is against protocol. You are not permitted in this zone during emergency." "Forget the protocol," Elias cut in. "Let me in, please." Another pause. Then the locks disengaged with a hiss and the doors slid open. Serenia stood inside, her pale form outlined by flickering emergency lights. She looked as composed as ever, but her posture was tense, ready. In her hand she held a small Veyari energy blade, its faint glow illuminating her face. "You should not be here," she said softly. "And leave you alone?" Elias replied, stepping inside. "Not a chance." Before either could say more, a crash echoed down the corridor behind them. The door they had just closed rattled under heavy impact. Voices shouted in a harsh, guttural tongue. "They are here," Serenia said, her calmness like a steel thread beneath the sound of chaos. Elias looked around quickly. The chamber held little more than furniture, displays, and a side console. "There has to be another exit." "There is," Serenia nodded. "Through the lower maintenance hall. But it is narrow. Only two can pass at once." The door shuddered again. A dent appeared in the metal. Elias swallowed hard. He had never fought in battle. His training was words, not weapons. But something in his chest refused to let fear take control. He grabbed a loose metal pipe from the floor and held it tight. "Go," he told Serenia. "Lead the way. I'll cover." Her eyes widened slightly, not in fear but in surprise. Then, for the first time since he met her, Serenia gave a small, fleeting smile. "Humans," she murmured. "Always unpredictable." They rushed down the narrow passage. Behind them, the chamber door finally gave way with a thunderous crash. Heavy footsteps followed, accompanied by shouts. Serenia led with swift precision, guiding them through dim maintenance corridors. Elias followed close, his pipe clutched in white-knuckled hands. The air was hot here, filled with the hum of power conduits and the hiss of steam from broken vents. At one junction, a shadow loomed, an intruder, tall and armored, raising a weapon. Before Elias could react, Serenia struck first, her energy blade flashing bright. The intruder staggered, falling back with a cry. Elias froze for a moment, then forced his legs to move again. The sight shook him, not because of violence itself, but because he realized something important. Serenia had not hesitated to fight, not for herself, but to protect him, finally. They reached a narrow shaft that led to an emergency shelter. Serenia pressed a code into the panel and the hatch slid open. "Inside," she said firmly. Elias ducked into the shelter. Serenia followed, sealing the hatch behind them. The room was small, barely enough for two, but it was shielded and secure. The noise outside faded to a dull echo. For the first time since the alarms began, Elias felt his breath slow. He leaned against the wall, sweat running down his face. "We made it." "Yes," Serenia said, lowering her blade. She studied him with unreadable eyes. "You risked much by coming here." "I couldn't just leave you," Elias admitted. "Not after—" He stopped himself, uncertain. Serenia tilted her head slightly. "Not after what?" Elias hesitated. Then in a quiet voice he said, "Not after you asked me that question." Her gaze softened, the first sign of emotion breaking through her usual calm. "You froze," she said gently. "I didn't know how to answer," Elias replied. "I didn't understand why it mattered." Serenia stepped closer, her presence filling the small room. "Among the Veyari, we do not ask lightly. To question someone's bond status is to wonder if a path exists, a path between two lives. I asked because I wished to know if such a path was possible." Elias felt the words settle deep inside him. For a long moment, neither spoke. The shelter's lights flickered softly, casting their shadows against the wall. Finally, Elias managed a faint smile.
You know.
For a diplomat, that might be the most dangerous question I've ever faced. Serenya's lips curved ever so slightly, a rare echo of a smile. And yet you are still here. Outside, the battle raged on. The station shuddered under distant explosions. But inside the small shelter, silence grew again, this time not heavy, not awkward, but alive. For the first time, Elias understood. This was no test, no trap, no diplomatic trick. Serenya had asked because she wanted to know him. And in that moment, surrounded by fire and chaos, Elias realized something else. Maybe that was what made humans strong in the galaxy. Not just their ships or weapons, but their ability to see one another, to risk themselves for another being, to answer questions that others feared to ask, and maybe, just maybe, it was the reason Serenya had asked him at all. The shelter walls trembled again. Even with the reinforced shielding, Elias could feel the faint vibration of explosions echoing through the station. The air inside was heavy with silence, and though the emergency lights glowed softly, they cast long shadows across the small chamber. Elias sat on the narrow bench, pipe still in his hands, while Serenya stood near the sealed hatch, blade ready. Her stillness was almost unreal. She looked like a statue carved from light and stone, yet Elias could see her breathing, slow and steady, as if she had trained her entire life for moments like this. "They won't stop," Elias said finally. His voice sounded louder than he meant it to in the confined space. "No," Serenya agreed calmly. "Intruders strike at weak points, then push further. They will not rest until their goal is achieved, and what's their goal?" Elias asked. Serenya turned, her pale eyes glowing faintly under the red lights. "The same as always. Influence. Power. If the Veyarian humans grow closer, others will lose their grip. So they try to break us apart before that bond can form." Her words sank deep into Elias. He remembered the whispers in the hall, the suspicious glances, the rumors of jealousy. It all made sense now. He leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. "So this isn't just about trade or borders anymore. It's about us." Serenya studied him in silence, then gave a slight nod. "Yes, it is about us." The shelter lights flickered again. A faint thud sounded against the hatch. Elias stiffened. "They found us," Serenya said quietly. Her blade hummed to life, glowing brighter. Elias tightened his grip on the pipe. His hands were sweaty, but he forced himself to breathe steady. He was no soldier, but he would not let Serenya stand alone. The hatch shook under another impact. Metal groaned. "Move back," Serenya ordered. "No," Elias said firmly. "We fight together." For the first time, Serenya's calm mask cracked just a little. Her eyes softened, almost warm. "You are reckless, human. But perhaps that is why your kind survives." The hatch burst open with a scream of tearing metal. Two intruders stormed inside, tall, armored beings with jagged weapons. Their eyes glowed like coals behind their helmets. Serenya moved first, her blade slicing in a clean arc that forced one back. The second raised its weapon toward her exposed side. Elias did not think. He swung the pipe with all his strength. The impact rang like a bell, knocking the intruder off balance. Pain shot through Elias's arms, but he ignored it. The creature staggered, and Serenya struck it down with precise force. Sparks flared, and the intruder collapsed. The second tried to recover, but Elias stepped forward, swinging again, clumsy but desperate. The strike gave Serenya the opening she needed. In moments, both attackers were down. Breathing hard, Elias leaned against the wall, pipe trembling in his grip. His arms ached, and his chest felt heavy. Serenya turned to him, her blade dimming. "You fought. I tried," Elias said, catching his breath. "You did more than try." She stepped closer, her gaze steady. "You chose to stand when you could have hidden. That is not something I will forget." They couldn't stay in the shelter. More would come. Serenya led them out into the corridors, her movements sharp and sure. Elias followed, every sense alive with fear and adrenaline. The station was chaos. Smoke filled the air, alarms wailed, and sparks rained from ruptured wires. Corpses of fallen guards and intruders alike lay scattered in the halls. Elias forced himself not to look too closely. At one junction, they met a group of station defenders pinned down by intruder fire. Without hesitation, Serenya leapt forward, her blade flashing bright. Elias ducked behind a broken console, heart racing, then grabbed a discarded shock baton. Together, they pushed the attackers back, clearing the path. The defenders stared at Elias in disbelief. "Envoy Mercer?" one shouted. "Save the questions," Elias replied, his voice steady despite his shaking hands. "Where's the command center?" "North Wing," the soldier answered. "But it's under siege." Serenia looked at Elias. "If the command center falls, the station is lost. Then we don't let it fall," Elias said, surprising even himself. The path to the North Wing was brutal. Fires burned in shattered rooms, and the air smelled of ozone and scorched metal. They moved through wreckage and smoke, fighting off small groups of intruders along the way. Elias was no warrior, but each time he raised his weapon, he felt less fear. The pipe and baton in his hands became more than tools of survival. They were symbols of his choice not to run. And with Serenia beside him, calm and precise, he found strength he hadn't known was there. At last, they reached the command center. The heavy doors were half destroyed, sparks showering from ruined panels. Inside, defenders struggled to hold the line as waves of intruders pressed forward. Without hesitation, Serenia charged. Her blade cut through the attackers with grace and deadly speed. Elias followed, striking where he could, forcing enemies back with sheer determination. The defenders rallied around them, shouting encouragement. "Push them back," Elias yelled. "Don't give them an inch." His voice carried more authority than he expected, and for a moment the soldiers actually listened. The tide shifted. Slowly, painfully, the intruders began to retreat. When the last enemy fell, silence swept the command center. Smoke curled from shattered consoles, and exhausted soldiers slumped against the walls. Elias stood in the middle, chest heaving, sweat dripping down his face. His arms felt like lead, but he was still standing. Serenia approached, lowering her blade. She studied him for a long time, her expression unreadable. Then softly she said, "You are not like the others." Elias gave a weak laugh. "I'm not sure if that's good or bad." "It is human," Serenia replied. "And that is why it matters." Hours later, the attackers were finally driven off. Reinforcements arrived, sweeping the corridors, securing the wounded. The station survived, but scars remained. Broken halls, lost lives, memories of fire and fear. Elias sat in the quiet aftermath, leaning against a wall. His body ached, but his mind spun with thoughts. He had seen death, chaos, destruction. Yet what stayed with him most was not the battle. It was Serenia's words, her trust, her calm strength beside him. And the question she had asked before all this began, "Are you single, human?" Now he understood what it meant. It was not just curiosity. It was not a mistake. It was a doorway, an invitation to something more than diplomacy. Serenia sat nearby, silent but close, her presence steady. For the first time, Elias felt he didn't need to speak. The bond between them had already begun to form, not through treaties or agreements, but through fire, risk, and the choice to stand together. And he knew the real question still waited. Not from her, but from himself. Was he ready to answer it? The battle was over, but the silence that followed felt almost heavier than the fight itself. The station still shook at times, not from enemy fire, but from the damage left behind. Panels sparking, walls groaning, air filters pushing smoke through tired vents. Elias sat with his back against the wall of the command center, his pipe finally resting beside him. His arms ached, his knuckles were bruised, and his legs felt like stone. But he was alive. They both were. Serenia stood near the viewport, staring into the stars. Her blade was now sheathed, her armor cracked in places but still holding. She didn't speak, not at first. Her calm presence filled the room like it always did, steady and grounding. At last, Elias broke the silence. "We made it." Serenia turned her head slightly, her glowing eyes reflecting the shattered lights. "We survived. That is not the same as winning. But survival is the first victory." Elias gave a tired smile. "That sounds like something my grandmother would have said." Serenia tilted her head. Then she was wise. The soldiers around them were already beginning repairs. Engineers patched broken systems, medics moved through the wounded, officers argued over next steps. But for Elias, all of it faded into the background, because every time he looked at Serenia, his mind returned to her question. "Are you single, human?" It had sounded almost casual when she said it, back in the quiet of their private chamber. But now, after standing side by side in fire and blood, Elias understood the weight behind it. It wasn't small talk. It was a risk. An invitation, and he hadn't answered. He looked down at his hands. The skin was raw where the pipe had rubbed against his palms. He thought about the man he was before, an envoy, a diplomat who believed words could solve everything. But words had nearly failed today. What saved them was not talk, but trust. The trust that had grown between him and Serenia. He closed his eyes for a moment, then looked at her again. She was still by the viewport, watching the void, her posture tall and proud. Yet there was something in her silence now, something waiting. Elias pushed himself up to his feet, slow and shaky. He crossed the room, each step heavy, until he stood beside her. The stars look different after a fight, Elias said quietly. Serenia's gaze stayed on the void. They look the same. It is we who change, he nodded. Yeah, we change. He hesitated, then added, that question you asked me, before everything happened. For the first time, Serenia turned fully to face him. Her eyes, pale and bright, held his without wavering. Yes, she said simply. Elias swallowed. His heart pounded harder than it had even during the battle. You asked if I was single? Yes. And I froze, he admitted. Yes, Serenia agreed again, though there was no judgment in her tone. Just truth. Elias took a breath. The truth is I am, and I think maybe I've been alone for a long time, even when I didn't want to admit it. Her eyes searched his face. Alone but not broken. Maybe not, Elias said. He gave a small, nervous laugh. But I don't know what comes after saying this. Humans don't usually connect with someone like you. Not from your world. Serenia stepped closer, just enough that the faint glow of her armor lit his face. And yet you stood with me when others would have run. You chose to fight beside me not because duty demanded it, but because your heart did. That is not the act of a stranger. Elias's breath caught. He realized then that she wasn't just asking about romance or curiosity. She was asking if he was willing to be more than a diplomat, if he was willing to be part of something larger, an alliance not just between their peoples but between two souls. I'm single, Elias said softly, but if I say yes to what you're asking, I don't want it to be casual, not just something we talk about and forget. Serenia tilted her head, her expression unreadable yet strangely gentle. In my culture, questions like mine are not asked lightly. When I ask, it is because I see a bond worth shaping, worth protecting, worth giving time to grow. Elias stared at her. Then my answer is yes. The words hung in the air like a quiet spark. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Serenia gave a small nod, slow and deliberate as though sealing an unspoken promise. Then we will see where this bond leads, she said. Elias felt a strange calm settle over him. For the first time in years, the weight of loneliness seemed lighter. He wasn't just an envoy anymore. He wasn't just Elias Mercer. He was someone who had chosen to stand beside another, not out of duty, but out of choice. And she had chosen him too. News of their stand spread quickly across the station. Stories traveled faster than official reports, of a human envoy and a Vayari warrior fighting side by side, of two voices giving strength when hope was failing. Soldiers who had seen them in the command center told the tale with pride, as if retelling it made their own courage stronger. When Elias and Serenia finally stepped out into the repaired halls, eyes followed them. Some looked with suspicion, others with respect, but most with quiet awe. One young officer saluted Elias. You kept us standing, sir. Elias shook his head. We all kept each other standing. The officer hesitated, then added, still. It mattered. Serenia walked beside him, silent but steady. She did not need to speak. Her presence said enough. Days later, when the station had calmed and repairs were underway, Elias found himself on the observation deck with Serenia once more. The stars stretched endlessly before them, cold and bright. This isn't over, is it? Elias asked. No, Serenia said. There will be more battles, more attempts to divide us. They fear what unity between our peoples could mean. And what does it mean? Elias asked, turning to her. Serenia's eyes glowed softly. It means we are stronger together than apart. It means your kind and mine have found something rare in the stars. Trust born not from treaties but from truth. Elias nodded slowly. He thought of Earth, of the long years humanity had wandered the void, searching for allies, for meaning. Maybe this was it. Not an empire, not conquest, but connection. He looked at Serenia, then asked quietly, And us? What does it mean for us? For a moment, she didn't answer. Then she placed her hand light, strong, steady over his. It means the question has been asked, and the answer has been given. Elias smiled, a real one this time. He didn't know what the future would bring: wars, politics, more danger, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't facing it alone. Together, they turned back to the stars, and somewhere out there, in the endless dark, the universe was already changing.